They labeled me defective during totem inavida, and by the time I reached 19, after 3 physicians had examined my fragile body and delivered their judgment, I started accepting it as truth. I'm Thomas Beaumont Callahan, 19 years old, and my physical form has perpetually let me down, an accumulation of imperfections carved into bone and muscle that never developed correctly. I came into the world prematurely during January 1840, showing up 2 months early amid the harshest winter Mississippi had experienced in decades. My mother, Sarah Beaumont Callahan, went into labor unexpectedly during a dinner gathering my father was hosting for visiting judges and planters. The midwife attending her, Mama Ruth, an enslaved woman who delivered most of the county's white infants, glanced at me and shook her head. "Judge Callahan," she informed my father, "this infant won't survive until morning. He's excessively tiny. His breathing's too shallow. Better ready your wife for the loss." But my mother, feverish and exhausted to the point of delirium, declined accepting that forecast. "He'll survive," she murmured, pressing my small body against her chest. "I'm certain of it. I sense his heartbeat. It's faint, yet it's struggling." She proved correct. I endured that initial night and the ones following. But enduring differs from flourishing. At 1 month, I weighed scarcely 6 pounds. At half a year, I remained unable to lift my head independently. At age 1, when other infants stood and some attempted initial steps, I could barely maintain a seated position. The physicians my father summoned from Natchez, from Vicksburg, from locations as distant as New Orleans, all delivered identical assessments. Premature birth had hindered my development permanently in ways affecting my entire existence. My mother passed when I was 6, taken by the yellow fever epidemic sweeping through Mississippi during 1846. I recall her lying in bed, complexion resembling aged parchment, eyes jaundiced and unfocused. She summoned me to her bedside the day preceding her death. "Thomas," she whispered, voice scarcely audible, "you'll encounter obstacles throughout your existence. People will undervalue you. They'll feel sorry for you. They'll disregard you. But you possess something exceeding physical power. You have your intellect, your spirit, your essence. Never permit anyone to make you feel incomplete." She passed the following morning. I didn't truly comprehend her words until considerably later. My father, Judge William Callahan, was imposing in every aspect where I wasn't. Standing 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, possessing a voice capable of hushing an entire courtroom with one word. He'd constructed his wealth from nothing, began as an impoverished Alabama attorney, went into the Beaumont family's modest plantation, and through astute investments and strategic land purchases, expanded those original 800 acres into an 8,000-acre cotton domain. Callahan Plantation occupied the elevated bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River, 15 miles south of Natchez in territory considered the South's most fertile ground. The primary residence was a Greek Revival manor my father had constructed in 1835, 2 stories of white-painted brick featuring massive Doric columns, wide galleries on both levels, and tall windows capturing river breezes. Inside, crystal chandeliers suspended from 15-foot ceilings, imported furnishings occupied rooms spacious enough for 100 guest balls, and Persian rugs covered polished hard pine floors. Behind the main house stretched the operational plantation, the cotton gin, blacksmith shop, carpentry workshop, smokehouse, laundry, kitchen building, overseer's residence, and beyond all that, the quarters, rows of small cabins where 300 enslaved individuals resided in circumstances contrasting sharply with the mansion's opulence. I matured within this realm of tremendous wealth constructed upon extreme brutality, though as a child I didn't grasp the complete implications. I received home tutoring from successive teachers my father employed. I was too delicate for school's rough environment, too sickly for boarding at academies where other planters' sons attended. Instead, I acquired Greek and Latin, mathematics and literature, history and philosophy within my father's library's quiet confines. By age 19, I measured 5 feet 2 inches tall, a boy entering puberty's height rather than a young man's. My frame was slight, weighing perhaps 110 pounds, with bones so fragile that Dr. Harrison once remarked I possessed a bird's skeletal structure. My chest curved inward somewhat, a condition physicians termed pectus excavatum, resulting from ribs that never formed properly. My hands trembled continuously, A subtle tremor making simple tasks like writing or holding a teacup require intense concentration. My vision was severely impaired, requiring thick spectacles magnifying my pale blue eyes to almost comical proportions. Without them, the world dissolved into blurriness. My voice never fully deepened, remaining in that awkward range between boyhood and manhood. My hair was fine and light brown, already thinning despite my youth. My skin appeared pale, nearly translucent, revealing every vein beneath the surface. Yet the worst aspect, the part ultimately determining my destiny, was my complete absence of masculine development. I possessed virtually no facial hair, just a few wispy strands on my upper lip that I shaved more from hope than necessity. My body was hairless, smooth as a child's, and the physician's examinations had verified what my father suspected: my reproductive organs were severely underdeveloped, rendering me infertile. The examination started shortly after my 18th birthday in January 1858. My father had arranged for me to meet a potential bride, Martha Henderson, daughter of a wealthy Port Gibson planter. The meeting proved disastrous. Martha glanced at me and couldn't conceal her revulsion. She maintained polite conversation for precisely 15 minutes before claiming a headache and departing. I overheard her telling her mother as they left, "Father can't genuinely expect me to wed that child. He appears like he'd snap in half on our wedding night." Following that humiliation, my father summoned Dr. Harrison. Dr. Samuel Harrison was Natchez' most prominent physician, a Yale-educated man in his 50s specializing in what he termed matters of masculine health and heredity. He arrived at Callahan Plantation on a humid February morning, carrying a leather medical bag and an air of clinical detachment. My father left us alone in his study. Dr. Harrison had me disrobe completely, then conducted the most humiliating hour of my existence. He measured me: height, weight, chest circumference, limb length. He examined every inch of my body, recording notes in a small leather journal. He paid particular attention to my groin, manipulating my underdeveloped testicles, commenting aloud about their size and consistency. "Significantly below normal," he muttered, writing. "Prepubertal in appearance and texture." When he finished, he had me dress and summoned my father back. "Judge Callahan," Dr. Harrison said, settling into a leather chair, "I'll be direct. Your son's condition isn't merely constitutional frailty. He suffers from what we term hypogonadism, a failure of the sexual organs to develop properly. This was likely caused by his premature birth and subsequent developmental delays." My father's face remained expressionless. What does this signify for his future, for marriage, for continuing the family line? Dr. Harrison glanced at me, then back at my father. "Judge, the probability of your son producing offspring is virtually non-existent. The testicular tissue is insufficient for spermatogenesis, the production of viable seed. His hormone production is clearly deficient, as evidenced by his lack of secondary sexual characteristics. Even if he were to marry, consummation might prove difficult, and conception would be, in my professional opinion, impossible." The word lingered in the air like a death sentence. Impossible. My father remained silent for an extended moment. "You're absolutely certain?" "As certain as medical science permits. I've encountered perhaps a dozen cases like this throughout my career. None produce children." "I see. Thank you, Dr. Harrison. I'll have your payment sent to your office." After the doctor departed, my father poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and gazed out the window at the river. "Father, I apologize," I said quietly. He didn't turn around. "For what?" "For being born prematurely. For being sickly. For being—" He trailed off, took a lengthy drink. "Not your fault, Thomas. But it is our reality." Yet my father wasn't satisfied with one opinion. A week later, Dr. Jeremiah Blackwood arrived from Vicksburg. He was younger than Dr. Harrison, more aggressive in his examination, rougher in handling my body. But his conclusion was identical: severe hypogonadism with associated sterility. The condition is permanent and untreatable. The third doctor came from New Orleans in March. Dr. Antoine Merrier was a Creole physician who'd studied in Paris and spoke with a thick French accent. He was the gentlest of the 3, apologizing for the examination's invasive nature. But his verdict matched the others. Just, but your son, he cannot father children. The development, it is arrested. Nothing can be done. 3 doctors, 3 examinations, 3 identical conclusions. Thomas Beaumont Callahan was sterile, unfit for breeding, incapable of continuing the family line. The news permeated Mississippi's planter society with the speed and thoroughness of gossip among people possessing nothing better to do than discuss each other's affairs. My father made no effort at secrecy. What purpose would it serve? Any woman agreeing to marry me would need awareness. Better honesty up front than facing recriminations later. The Hendersons withdrew their daughter from consideration immediately. The Rutherfords, who'd expressed interest in introducing me to their younger daughter, sent a polite note declining. The Prestons, the Montgomerys, the Fairfaxes, all the prominent families who might have overlooked my physical frailty for the Callahan fortune's sake, all suddenly discovered reasons why their daughters were unsuitable or already promised elsewhere. Yet it wasn't solely the private rejections causing pain. It was the public comments. I overheard Mrs. Harrison at church in April, "Such a pity about the Callahan boy. The judge possesses all that wealth and no proper heir to leave it to. Makes you question what the point is." At a dinner party my father hosted in May, one guest, drunk on my father's fine whiskey, stated loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway, "It's nature's method, isn't it? The weak ones aren't meant to reproduce. Maintains the stock healthy." A visiting Louisiana planter examining a horse my father was selling commented, "Fine animal. Strong lines, good conformation, proven stud. Not like that son of yours, eh? Sometimes breeding simply fails." Each remark was a knife, but I'd learned to display no reaction. What purpose would it serve? They were correct according to their understanding. I was defective merchandise, a failed investment, a dead-end branch on the family tree. My father retreated into himself during spring and summer of 1858. He still managed the plantation with his customary efficiency, still served as county judge, still attended social functions. But at home, he grew increasingly distant, spending long hours in his study with bourbon and legal documents, working on something he wouldn't discuss with me. I withdrew into books. My father's library contained over 2,000 volumes, and I'd read most by age 19. I particularly cherished philosophy and poetry, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Keats, Shelley, Byron. I found comfort in words composed by men who'd contemplated suffering, mortality, and the human condition. I also started exploring books my father didn't know existed in his library, volumes previous owners had left behind or that had been accidentally included in lots purchased at estate sales. These included abolitionist literature technically illegal in Mississippi, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass published in 1845, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe published in 1852, essays by William Lloyd Garrison and other Northern abolitionists. I read these forbidden books late at night when the house was quiet, and they disturbed me profoundly. I'd grown up accepting slavery as natural, as divinely ordained, as beneficial to both master and slave, the notion that enslaved people were inferior, childlike, incapable of self-governance. This was what everyone around me believed and taught. But these books presented a different picture. Frederick Douglass wrote with intelligence and eloquence matching any white author I'd read. He described slavery's brutality, the whippings, family separations, sexual exploitation, psychological torture of being treated as property. Uncle Tom's Cabin, despite being fiction, depicted slavery's horrors with devastating emotional impact. I began noticing things I'd previously ignored, the scars on field hands' backs, the way enslaved people's expressions went blank and subservient when white people approached, the children who looked suspiciously like my father's overseers, the women who disappeared from fields for months then returned without the babies they'd obviously carried. Yet I did nothing with these observations. I was too weak, too dependent, too compromised by my own comfort to challenge the system. I told myself I was different from other slaveholders, that I treated enslaved people with more kindness. But kindness doesn't diminish slavery's evil. It merely makes the enslaver feel better about participating. In September 1858, my father made another attempt at finding me a bride. He contacted families outside Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia. He lowered his standards, approaching families of lesser wealth and social standing. He offered increasingly generous dowries, guaranteeing any woman marrying me would live in luxury and want for nothing. The responses were variations on a theme: "Thank you for your generous offer, but Caroline is already promised to another. We appreciate your interest, but we don't feel it would be a suitable match. While your son seems a fine young man, we're looking for a situation with different prospects." That last one was particularly cruel. Different prospects was a polite way of saying a husband capable of providing grandchildren. By December 1858, my father had stopped trying. We ate dinner together in silence most nights, the clink of silver on china the only sound in the massive dining room. Sometimes he'd look at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, disappointment certainly, but also something resembling desperation. The explosion came in March 1859. It was late evening and my father had been drinking more than usual. I was in the library reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius when he burst in. "Thomas, we need to discuss something." I set down the book. "Yes, Father." He sat down heavily, bourbon sloshing in his glass. "I'm 58 years old. I could die tomorrow or live another 20 years, but either way, I'll die eventually. And when I do, what becomes of all this?" He gestured vaguely at the room, the house, the plantation beyond. "The estate will go to our nearest male relative, I suppose. Cousin Robert in Alabama." Cousin Robert, my father spat, is an incompetent drunk who's lost 2 small plantations to bad debt. He'd sell this place within a year and drink away the profits. Everything I've built, everything my father built before me, gone. "I'm sorry, Father. I know this isn't the situation you wanted." Sorry doesn't solve the problem. He stood, began pacing. "For 18 months, I've tried everything. 18 months of searching for a wife who'd accept you despite your condition. No one will. No one wants a husband who can't produce heirs. That's the reality. I know. So I've had to think creatively, very creatively, about solutions that push the boundaries of convention." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "What do you mean?" He stopped pacing, looked directly at me. "I'm giving you to Delilah." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Delilah, the field hand. I'm giving her to you as your companion. Your wife in practical terms." The words made no sense. "Father, you cannot possibly be suggesting." "I'm not suggesting. I'm telling you what's going to happen." His voice was hard now, the voice he used in court when pronouncing sentence. "No white woman will marry you. That's established fact. But the Callahan line needs to continue. The plantation needs heirs, even if those heirs are unconventional." The full horror of what he was proposing struck me. "You want me to, with a slave woman?" "Father, that's, even if I could, which the doctors say I can't, that's not how inheritance works. A child from a slave woman wouldn't be your heir. They'd be property. Unless I free them. Unless I legally adopt them. Unless I structure my will very carefully, which as a judge and lawyer, I'm uniquely qualified to do. This is insane. This is necessary." He sat down again, leaning forward. "Thomas, listen to me. I've thought this through from every angle. You can't produce children. The doctors were unanimous about that. But children can be produced on your behalf. Delilah is strong, healthy, intelligent. I'll arrange for her to be bred with a suitable male from another plantation, strong stock, proven fertility, good physical specimens. The children she bears will legally be mine through documentation I'll create. When I die, I'll will them to you along with papers freeing them and establishing them as your adopted heirs. They'll inherit everything. You're talking about breeding human beings like livestock. I'm talking about ensuring the continuation of this family and this plantation. Is it unconventional? Yes. Is it legally complex? Absolutely. But it's possible and it solves our problem. It's not my problem." I stood, my hands trembling more than usual. "Father, what you're describing is evil. You want to use a woman's body without her consent to produce children who will be manipulated through legal fictions into becoming heirs. You're treating people like breeding stock, like animals. They are animals in the eyes of the law. His voice rose to match mine. Thomas, I understand you've been reading those abolitionist books. Yes, I know about them. I'm not blind. You filled your head with sentimental nonsense about the humanity of slaves, but the legal reality is that they are property. I own Delilah the same way I own this house or that chair. And I'm choosing to use her in a way that solves a problem. And what does Delilah think about this? She'll do what she's told. She's property, Thomas. Her opinion is irrelevant. Something inside me snapped. I'd spent my entire life deferring to my father's authority, accepting his decisions, trying to compensate for being a disappointing son. But this was too much. No. The word emerged quietly but firmly. My father blinked. What did you say? I said no. I won't be part of this. If you want to implement this obscene breeding scheme, you'll do it without my participation or cooperation. You ungrateful, he stood, face reddening. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for you? The opportunities I've lost because I had to focus on finding solutions for my defective son. The social embarrassment of having an heir who can't perform the one basic function required of him. I didn't ask to be born this way. And I didn't ask for a son who'd end the family line. He threw his glass, which shattered against the fireplace. I'm trying to find a solution, and you're throwing it back in my face out of some misguided moral superiority you learned from abolitionist propaganda. It's not propaganda to say that people shouldn't be bred like animals, Father. If you can't see the evil in what you're proposing, get out. Get out of my sight. I left the library, heart pounding, whole body shaking. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed, trying to process what had just happened. My father wanted to use an enslaved woman as breeding stock to produce heirs that would legally be manipulated into inheriting his plantation, and he saw nothing wrong with this plan. In fact, he thought it was a clever solution to an intractable problem. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Delilah, about the life my father was planning for her without her knowledge or consent. I'd seen her around the plantation. Of course, she was hard to miss. Delilah was 24 years old, nearly 6 feet tall, with a powerful build from years of fieldwork. She had skin the color of polished mahogany, high cheekbones, and eyes that held an intelligence she'd learned to hide in the presence of white people. She was what the overseers called a prime field hand, strong enough to pick 300 pounds of cotton daily, healthy enough to work through brutal Mississippi summers without collapsing. I'd heard the overseers talking about her, that Delilah's worth 3 regular hands, never gets sick, never complains, works like a machine. But I'd also heard darker comments, shame to waste breeding potential like that on field work. A woman built like that should be having babies every year. Now my father wanted to ensure that breeding potential was exploited. I couldn't let that happen. But what could I do? I had no authority over the plantation. I was 19 years old, physically weak, financially dependent on my father. I couldn't free Delilah, I didn't own her. And even if I did, the legal process was complex and expensive. I couldn't help her escape, I barely knew her, had no connections to the Underground Railroad, and wouldn't know the first thing about arranging escape for a fugitive slave. But I couldn't do nothing. The next morning, still shaking from the confrontation and lack of sleep, I made a decision. I needed to warn Delilah, at minimum. She deserved to know what my father was planning. The quarters were located a quarter-mile behind the main house down a dirt path lined with ancient oak trees. I'd rarely visited them before, it wasn't proper for the master's son to mingle with the enslaved. The few times I'd been there were during Christmas distributions when my father would hand out extra rations and cheap gifts to the people who made his wealth possible. The quarters consisted of 20 small cabins arranged in 2 rows. Each cabin housed between 6 and 10 people in conditions contrasting sharply with the mansion's luxury: rough pine plank walls, dirt floors, a single fireplace for heating and cooking, 1 or 2 small windows with wooden shutters but no glass. It was mid-morning on a Tuesday, which meant most field hands were out working. Only a few people were around, an elderly woman tending a cook fire, some children too young to work, a man with a bandaged leg sitting on a cabin step. They all stared as I walked past. It wasn't common for white people to visit the quarters, except the overseer on his rounds or my father on inspection tours. A frail young white man in fine clothes walking alone through the quarters, I must have looked completely out of place. I asked the elderly woman which cabin belonged to Delilah. She looked at me suspiciously. "Why you asking after Delilah, young master? I need to speak with her. It's important. She out in the fields. Won't be back till sundown." "I'll wait." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she pointed to the third cabin in the second row. "That's hers. But I don't know what business you got with her." I spent the day in uncomfortable limbo. I couldn't return to the main house, my father and I weren't speaking. I couldn't wait in Delilah's cabin, that would be completely inappropriate. So I walked the plantation grounds, avoiding areas where my father might be, trying to formulate what I'd say to Delilah when she returned. The sun was setting when I saw the field hands returning. They walked in loose groups, exhausted from 10 hours of labor under the March sun. Delilah was easy to spot. She was a head taller than most of the others, walking with straight-backed posture despite obvious fatigue. She saw me standing near her cabin and stopped. "Master Thomas." The other field hands stared, whispering among themselves. This was highly unusual, the master's son waiting at a slave cabin. "Delilah, I need to speak with you. It's important." "May I?" I gestured toward her cabin. She glanced at the other workers, then nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." We entered the cabin. It was a single room, about 12 by 14 feet, with a dirt floor and rough plank walls. A fireplace occupied one wall, cold now in the mild evening. 3 rough wooden pallets served as beds. Delilah shared the cabin with 2 other women who worked in the laundry. There was a crude table, 2 stools, a few cooking pots, and some clothing hanging from pegs on the wall. This was where 3 human beings lived. The contrast between this and my bedroom in the mansion, with its 4-poster bed, imported furniture, soft carpets, and walls lined with bookshelves, was staggering. Delilah stood uncertainly in the middle of the room. "Is something wrong, Master Thomas?" "Where to begin? How do you tell someone your father is planning to use her as breeding stock?" "Delilah, I need to tell you something my father is planning. Something that involves you." Her expression became carefully neutral, the look enslaved people adopted when dealing with white people who might mean danger. "Yes, sir." I told her everything, about my sterility, about my father's desperation for heirs, about his plan to breed her with a male slave from another plantation, about the legal machinations that would turn her children into my adopted heirs. As I spoke, I watched her face cycle through shock, horror, and then a kind of weary resignation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "So the judge plans to use me like a broodmare?" "Yes. And I wanted you to know, I wanted to warn you so you could. I don't know. Prepare yourself. Resist, if possible. Though I know that's almost impossible given your situation." "Why?" She looked at me directly now, fear temporarily overcome by curiosity. "Why you telling me this, Master Thomas? Why do you care what happens to me?" It was a fair question. Why did I care? I'd lived my entire life benefiting from slavery without questioning it. I'd worn clothes made by enslaved people, eaten food prepared by enslaved people, lived in luxury built on enslaved labor. What made this different? Because what my father is planning is wrong. Not just morally wrong in some abstract sense, but practically, specifically wrong in a way I can't ignore anymore. "You think slavery's wrong?" There was skepticism in her voice. "I think." I struggled for words. "I think I've been reading too much lately. Books that make me question things I've always accepted. And when my father laid out his plan, when he talked about you like you were livestock to be bred for his purposes, something in me couldn't accept it." "But you still own slaves." "Your father still owns me." "Yes. And I don't have an answer for that contradiction. I'm complicit in a system I'm starting to understand is evil. But I couldn't let my father's plan happen without at least warning you. Delilah sat down on one of the stools, suddenly looking exhausted. Master Thomas, I appreciate the warning. Truly. But what am I supposed to do with this information? I can't refuse. If the judge orders me bread, I'll be bread. If I resist, I'll be whipped until I comply or sold to someone worse or killed. There is no escape from this. There might be. The words were out before I'd fully thought them through. She looked up. What? There might be a way out. I've been thinking about it all day. If you were to escape. Escape to where? We're in Mississippi. There are slave patrols everywhere. I have no papers, no money, no knowledge of the roads north. And I'm a 6-foot-tall black woman. I'm not exactly inconspicuous. I'd be caught within a day and sold south, probably to a Louisiana sugar plantation where I'd be worked to death within a few years. What if you had papers? What if you had money? What if you had someone to travel with who could deflect suspicion? She stared at me. Master Thomas, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting. I took a deep breath. I'm suggesting that maybe we both leave together. We go north. I have money. My mother left me a trust fund that I can access. Not a fortune, but enough to get us started somewhere. I can forge travel passes in my father's handwriting. We take a wagon and supplies and we just go. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Master Thomas, if we're caught, do you know what would happen? You'd be imprisoned for slave theft. I'd be killed. They don't just whip runaway slaves in Mississippi. They make examples of them, public hanging, sometimes worse. I know. But if we succeed, and if we somehow make it north, then what? You'd be throwing away everything. Your inheritance, your social position, your family name. You'd be poor. You'd be an outcast. And for what? To help one slave escape when your father owns 300. It was the fundamental question. And I didn't have a good answer except the truth. Because I can't save 300 people. But maybe I can save one. Maybe I can stop one evil thing from happening. And maybe that's better than doing nothing. Why me? You don't even know me. Because you're the one my father's planning to hurt. Because I can't stop him from continuing slavery, but I can try to stop him from breeding you like an animal. And because I hesitated. Because I think maybe we both need to escape, you from slavery, me from a life of complicity in a system I'm starting to realize I can't morally accept. Delilah studied me with those intelligent eyes that had been trained to hide their intelligence. You really mean this? Yes. You'd give up everything to help me escape? Yes. Even though you barely know me. Even though I'm just one slave among millions. Even though it might not make any real difference in the grand scheme. Yes. Because it would make a difference to you. And right now that feels like the only thing I can actually control. She was quiet for a long time. Outside I could hear other enslaved people moving around, preparing evening meals, settling in for the night. The sun had fully set now and the cabin was lit only by faint moonlight through the window. Finally, Delilah said, if we do this, and I'm not saying yes yet, I'm just saying if, we'd need to be smart about it. We'd need to plan carefully. The judge has connections everywhere in Mississippi. He'd send people after us. I know. And we'd need to move fast. If he's planning to bring in a male slave to breed me with, that could happen any day. When would you want to leave? Give me 2 days to think about it. To prepare what little I have. To say goodbye to people in a way that doesn't arouse suspicion. She stood up. Master Thomas, I don't fully understand why you're doing this. Part of me thinks this is some kind of trap or cruel joke. But if you're sincere, if you really mean to help me escape, then I'll take that chance. Because you're right. What your father's planning is worse than the risk of running. I'm sincere. I swear it. Then we leave in 2 days. Thursday night, after everyone's asleep. Meet me at the stable at midnight. Bring money, supplies, and those forged travel passes. I'll bring what little I have. I nodded. Thursday night. Midnight. She walked to the cabin door, opened it, then turned back. Master Thomas. Thomas. If we do this, if we make it north, what then? What do you expect from me? Nothing. I expect nothing except that you'd be free. What you do with that freedom is entirely your choice. You're not doing this expecting me to be grateful in certain ways. Expecting me to be your mistress or companion or... No. Absolutely not. I'm doing this because it's right. Or at least less wrong than doing nothing. That's all. She studied me for another moment, then nodded. Thursday night. Don't be late. And don't change your mind. I left the quarters and walked back to the mansion in the dark, my heart pounding. What had I just agreed to? I was planning to steal my father's property, because that's what Delilah was in the eyes of the law, property, and flee north with her. If we were caught, I'd be imprisoned. Delilah would likely be killed. But if we succeeded, one person would be free. One woman wouldn't be forced into the breeding scheme my father had planned. It wasn't saving the world. It wasn't ending slavery. But it was something. The next 2 days were agony. I avoided my father as much as possible, taking meals in my room, claiming illness. He didn't push the issue, we were still angry with each other, and he likely assumed I needed time to come around to his plan. I used those 2 days to prepare. I went to the bank in Natchez and withdrew nearly all of my trust fund, $800, a substantial sum. I packed a bag with clothes, books, and necessities. I studied maps of Mississippi and the roads north. I practiced my father's signature on travel passes, getting the loops and flourishes exactly right. I also wrote letters, one to my father explaining why I was leaving, one to Dr. Harrison thanking him for his professional care, one to the few friends I had over the years saying goodbye. The letter to my father was the hardest. Father. Asterisk, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm leaving Mississippi and I won't be returning. I know this will anger you, disappoint you, and perhaps hurt you. For that, I'm sorry, asterisk. Asterisk, but I cannot be part of your plan for Delilah. I cannot participate in a scheme that treats human beings as breeding stock. You raised me to value education, reason, and moral principle. The education you provided has led me to conclusions you won't like, asterisk. Asterisk, slavery is evil, and our participation in it is wrong. I'm not asking you to understand or approve. I'm simply telling you that I've made my choice, asterisk. The Callahan line may end with me, but it will end with whatever dignity I can salvage rather than continue through the moral bankruptcy of your breeding scheme. I hope someday you'll understand. Your son, Thomas. I sealed the letter and left it on my desk. Thursday night arrived. I couldn't eat dinner. I lay in bed, fully clothed, listening to the house settle into sleep. My father retired to his room around 10. The servants finished their evening duties by 11. By 11:30, the mansion was silent. At 11:45, I grabbed my bag, crept downstairs, and slipped out through the kitchen door. The stable was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through gaps in the walls. I hitched up one of the smaller wagons, a 2-horse rig we used for local travel. I loaded my bag, some food I'd stolen from the kitchen, blankets, and a canteen of water. At exactly midnight, Delilah appeared. She carried a small bundle, everything she owned in the world, probably. Some clothes, maybe a few personal items. That was it. 24 years of life reduced to one small bundle. You came, she said quietly. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure. Part of me thought this was all a dream. Or a trick. It's neither. Are you ready? She looked back at the quarters visible in the distance. As ready as I'll ever be. We climbed into the wagon. I took the reins. I'd driven wagons before, though not often. Delilah sat beside me, her bundle in her lap. "Where are we going?" she asked as we started moving. "Northeast to start. We'll avoid Natchez, too many people who know me. We'll head toward Vicksburg, then into Tennessee. From there, we'll work our way to Ohio. Cincinnati has a large free black community. We can disappear there. That's at least 400 miles. Closer to 500. It'll take us 2 weeks, maybe more. We'll travel mostly at night, rest during the day in wooded areas off the main roads. You've thought this through." I had 2 days. I did my best. We rode in silence for a while. The plantation fell away behind us, and soon we were on the main road heading northeast. The night was clear, the moon bright enough to see by. Every sound made my heart race. Was that a patrol? Was that someone following us? But it was just wind, animals, the normal sounds of a Mississippi night. After an hour, Delilah spoke again. "Thomas, can I call you Thomas?" "Of course. We're not master and slave anymore. We're just 2 people trying to get north. Thomas, I need to ask you something honestly. Why are you really doing this? And I don't want the noble answer about stopping one evil. I want the real reason." I thought about that as the horses plodded on. The real reason. I think I've spent my entire life being told I'm defective. That I'm less than a real man because my body doesn't work right. That I'm worthless because I can't produce heirs. And I've internalized that. I've believed it. I don't see what that has to do with helping me. My father's plan would have used you the same way society has used me, reduced you to your reproductive function, treated you as valuable only for what you could produce. And I realized I couldn't participate in doing to someone else what's been done to me. Does that make sense? "Yes," she said quietly. "It makes perfect sense." We traveled through the night and into the dawn. As the sun rose, we pulled off the road into a grove of trees. I unhitched the horses and let them graze. Delilah and I